Oh my goodness gracious. Hey, everybody. Well, last week, Father Lowe and I were catching up on the NEA. This week, we could not get the microphones to work. I don't know what happened, but hopefully you can hear us. I'm sorry for the delay. The perspiration you see on my forehead is from 15 minutes. Can you hear this? Can you hear this? Can you hear this? Oh my gosh. Okay. In we go. All right. First of all, I want to welcome my good friend, Father Lowe from St. John the Divine in Jacksonville, Florida. All of you have been watching this for the past couple of weeks and seen how wonderful he is. And I always tell you about this. He has a wonderful book called Renewing You, which he wrote with his wife, Roxanne, Presbytera Roxanne. I love the book. We'll talk more about that and how you can get it towards the end of the video here. But today, I'm dying to talk about, there's some of the stuff that I've heard you talk about, Father, that I knew, and some I did not know. So first of all, welcome. Thanks for going through that 15 minutes of tribulation with me. And the first question I want to ask, as I say welcome to you, is one of the things you talked about was Jacob's ladder. And I thought it was just so fascinating. And I think a lot of people may not know that. So welcome. And if you want to pick it up from there, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, what we talk about a great deal in our church is obviously Jacob's ladder. And we see a modern day, or if you will, the equivalent of that with a saint in our church called St. John Climacus. The word in Greek for ladder is the word Climacus. And basically what he has developed was basically this desire to climb. He gives like these 33 steps based upon the years of Christ's life of different areas that we should be climbing every single day in our life. And this book was so powerful, Bob, that it became one of the best-selling books. In fact, with the innovation of what was called then called the Gutenberg Press, which really mass-produced the Bible, one of the other major books that were produced in addition to the Bible throughout the entire world was this book by John Climacus called The Ladder of Divine Ascent. It's an absolute classic in Christianity. St. John Climacus is a very much part of our church tradition. And he says this beautiful quote where it says, basically in summation, climb, always climb, my brothers and sisters, never stop climbing, basically to become the people that God yearns for us to be. And so for a lot of people in our life, you know, for many of us, we can kind of settle. We can kind of get into a status quo, or really, as I was mentioning a couple of weeks ago, instead of having above and beyond kind of mentality, what Christ desires for us to have, we can have a below or average in almost every facet of our life. We see that kind of, you know, being average with our walk of faith, average in our relationships, average at school, average in our morals and values. And God never created us to be average. He created us to be above and beyond in whatever way that looks like for each and every one of us. And so for what I try to challenge people about is asking the question, are you climbing your ladder? Are you looking for ways every day to climb the ladder to become the people that God desires for us to be? And if not, because in Christianity, you're either growing or you're dying. There's no status quo. There's no neutral in Christianity.
You know, having listened to quite a few of your sermons and talked to you at length, I think that if I had to kind of sum up a lot of what you talk about is, I don't know if it's a frustration, I don't know if that's the right word, but a driving of your congregation to not just settle for where you're at, to read the Bible more, to strive to be a better Christian, to grow in your faith. Would you say that's accurate representation?
Absolutely, because I think what we don't realize oftentimes, and we talk about this a lot on your program, and I think for the Christians and for people of faith in general that are listening to our broadcast, is that the Bible says in the book of Ephesians that we do not fight against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities. So you need to really hear this, everyone. You're not fighting against your brother or your sister, even though at times you think you are. You're fighting against an evilness that exists in this world that the church has always recognized in the literature, in the hymnography, even in the iconography of the church, has always embraced this. And sometimes I think because we're uncomfortable with talking about it, we just tend to kind of ignore it. But the enemy loves status quo Christians, Christians that dismiss, or settle for average. So it can look like, just for example, in our walk of faith, it could be, well, I'm better off than the other person. At least I'm coming to church. We can kind of justify in our own mind where we are, and think that, and compare ourselves to other people, or sometimes even in our own, areas that we've kind of settled in is like, I've always had this problem with this family member, never going to resolve it. It's always going to be in conflict, or I'm settling for whatever my persistent sin is. Well, this is just who I am. Or a personality area of of the way in which I communicate. Like maybe I'm a yeller, or well, it's just who I am, Father Nick. I was always like this. My mom and dad were like that. That's the kind of selling I'm talking about. And God is saying, are you climbing the ladder to continuously grow to the person, not who you want to be, but who God desires for us to be? In the Orthodox Church, we call this theosis, this constant desire to become more and more looking, acting, communicating, speaking, living the way Christ is, and looking more like him in everything that we do.
Got it. What I thought was so great, and one of the points you brought up, and I think it was either you were saying it, or that it was part of what St. John said about when you fall off the ladder. And I thought it was such a great one, is if you remember people's mistakes. You gave that as an example, and I thought, man, and also you had several right after that. You go on like talking about other people, or if you're impatient. I was looking at those, and I thought the visual is so spot on.
Mm-hmm.
I think what you were saying is, as you're climbing up, when you do those things, remember other people's mistakes, talking about other people. If you're impatient, that's when you start falling off the ladder. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And again, we talk about this a lot, Bob, and you hear me talk about it, and I know that you feel the same way I do about this, but this is practical Christianity. So when you study yourself and you're going, okay, today I was talking bad about someone, well, then I'm falling off the ladder because I'm judging someone. When I'm going around and I'm, gossiping about someone, or lying about someone, I'm falling off that ladder. And again, or if I'm just spiritually lazy, I've gone 2 or 3 days or a week without praying or really connecting. Or maybe the only time that you connect with Christ is when you leave your driveway to pull into the driveway at the church. That's the only time that really comes to your mind. I mean, all these things that we're talking about are opportunities that the devil is trying to do to slip us from climbing up on that ladder. Because the moment that you try to get closer to Christ, you all know this, is the more that the enemy is coming after you. He already has the people that are not following him. That's already easy. The ones who are the people that he wants to put in his trophy case. And I know on a personal level, Bob, one of the things I say, and I don't say this in any type of arrogance, or even for that matter, the opposite of being just false piety. For me, I know in my own life as a priest, and as a shepherd to my community, I have to walk the talk, because if I'm not living out the faith that I'm telling people to act on Sunday, and I'm a sinner, just like St. Paul says, of whom I am the first, I own that. But if I'm not working and they don't see that working in me, well, then, again, it's falling off the ladder. And the enemy will always play on your greatest weakness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever that weakness is for you, remember that sometimes you may think you're past it, and then you'll recognize that maybe when you're tired or going through a difficult time, that struggle comes back again. The negativity, the laziness, the judging, the gossiping, the comparing yourself to other people, all those things that will happen. And that's why the Bible says so many times, stand firm in our faith. In other words, hold on to that ladder and move up to the next step. Because again, if you're not climbing, you're falling.
We're going to get into the 3 steps that we talk about, but I want to tell you 2 interesting things that happened in the last couple of weeks that made me think about things that we've talked about. One was, it happened on Sunday. So I'm speaking I'm doing the master ceremonies at the Archdiocese event coming up in, I think in about 3 weeks. And so we were going up there. It's a black tie thing. So I told Trisha, let's go out, we'll look at some dresses and so forth. So she had ordered one. She ordered it, and it came in the mail, and she tried it on. And this was on Sunday. She got it on Sunday, tried it on, and said, "No, not right. I'm going to take it back." So I'll go with you. So we go to the store, and I'm moseying around, and I can see her across the way returning it, and it was about 5-10 minutes. I'm thinking, well, that's a long time. And I look over and I can see steam coming out of her ears. So I go over there and I said, what's happening? She said, I gave him the dress. I returned it. They punched it all up. And she said, hey, by the way, I just want to let you know that when I got the dress, and she turned it over, she goes, there was lipstick and stuff on the inside. So this had already been worn. Mm. And the attendant goes, oh, I can't return it here now. You have to mail it back now. And so he said, wait, what? I got to do what? And she goes, yeah, you got to call up the 800 number and get this. So I could just tell, and I thought, so I said, okay, Trish, go. She was going to the shop. I said, just go there. And I ended up talking to the manager. The manager, it took about 45 minutes. She gets all the thing. We didn't have to, she did all the packing. And I said, okay, my wife went to this other store. And I said, she goes, I'll walk you over there. What had been such a tense situation, ended up walking over there. And she said, you know, I work here once a month. She said, I've been here for 26 years. She goes, I now have a UPS store, a little store that I manage. And I said, oh, what's that like? She said, good. We talked. And the situation just got better. It got better. It was a good exchange. They ended up returning it. We didn't have to call the 800 because she was kind. She went and called them, you know. And it just made me think that a situation that patience won the day. And I'll tell you what you were saying. When you make faith-based movies, you cannot walk on the set and be a jerk. You just and I'll tell you, because a lot of times we have non-believers on the set, people that are on the crew cast, and a lot of those people are just looking at you, waiting. And as people you know that are mutual friends, I will tell you, there are in these movies, there's tense times. There is times that really put you to the test. And I try so hard. We had some young Greek adults on our set the last time, and it really, like you said, you have to walk the walk and talk. I can get away with it. I could be a jerk, and you know, and you have to walk the walk, and it's not easy. Believe me, there are times when I wish, you know, I could do better. But anyway, it kind of reminded me of what you were saying. And there was one other one I'll give you, and then we'll go to the steps because it made me think of you. So we had horrible rains here in California for months. It seemed like it didn't stop raining. Roof was leaking. Everyone's roof was leaking. We got a bunch of guys that came in and said, you know, gave bids for the roof, etc. One guy came in, and he was just really honest. You could just feel it. Really thorough, really detailed, and he gave us an offer, and we said, okay. Tricia was going to say, I said, no, I'll call him, call him up, said, okay, you got the job. And right before we got off, I said, hey, I just want to tell you something. I said, do you know why you got the job? He said, no. I said, you just were very honest and very detailed and very thorough. And he was home playing with his kids. And he said, you just made my week. And he wrote me an email. And so it's the things that we're talking about. Those are little moments, patience, and being supportive and encouraging of others. We talked about last week. I see those things growing and helping me, and I'm sure helping others. So, all right, let's go to the first step. There's 3 steps that you talked about to begin to climb the ladder. And the first one was sit next to God, which I thought was such an interesting way to put it. If you want to elaborate on that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as you guys are hearing what we're talking about today, I think the question that I would ask you is kind of going back earlier to what is a step that God is wanting you to take that you haven't taken. So we're going to give you 3 of these that are very basic steps. But what is a step that God would be saying that to take a step closer to Him that He's been wanting you to do that you have not done, and maybe a part of your life, whether it be your relationship, whether it be your communication, whether it be your forgiveness, whether it be your emotional health, whatever it is, ask yourself as you're hearing this. But the very first one that I shared is number 1 is sit next to God. I love the story of Mary and Martha, and many of you know the story very, very well. And Jesus Christ would oftentimes spend time with Mary, Martha, and their brother Lazarus. They were very good friends. We hear them connecting on a number of occasions, not just when Lazarus ultimately dies, and the shortest verse in the Bible, as we oftentimes talk about, of Jesus cried, is shared at Lazarus's at the hearing of Lazarus's death. But what's interesting is that Martha is doing, and Mary invite Christ over. And when they invite him over, Martha, being the older one, is beginning to do all the work in the kitchen. She's preparing this meal, preparing everything that she needs to be a great host, which on the surface is a great thing to be doing. Mary, on the other hand, is sitting right next to Christ. And being the younger person, it was her responsibility. It was customary that she should be obviously helping her sister in preparing this hospitality that one would say that you're giving to a guest, obviously like Christ, but a guest that was visiting. And eventually you can just hear in the scriptures the emotional unease, if you will, or frustration that Martha has. So much so that for a woman back in those days, a Jewish woman, to enter a room in which a man was talking, would have been considered really inappropriate on a number of levels. But because you can see her frustration, the fact that she's working in the kitchen, her sister is sitting next to Christ, and she's so frustrated because she's saying, I'm doing all this work, and she's not doing anything at all. So she comes there and she says, she tells Christ in summary, hey, listen, I'm over here working. I'm trying to prepare this great meal, this great hospitality for you, and my sister, who should be helping, is sitting right at next to your feet. And can you please tell her to come and help me? And it's interesting how Jesus responds to her. He says, Martha, and I always tell people this: whenever you hear Christ use your name twice, you never want to hear it once, but when you hear it twice, it's like, it's like this, this, come on, Martha. I mean, it's like this almost this frustration, but it's trying to jerk her attention and say, hey, listen, Martha, Martha, you are so occupied with so many things. And the word that he's using there is that you're so busy with so many different things, and only one thing is needed. And what is that one thing? I need you to sit next to me. And I talk about sitting next to God because for so many of us, we sit next to God at a certain period of our week, but not all the way through our life. So in other words, God is part of our life, but he's not occupying all of our life. And I've shared this before, and I'll just remind the listeners today, is that I think of the word busy as the letters of that word is bound under Satan's yoke. The enemy desires for you to be so busy in your life, doing things that you think are noble, which, by the way, those are great things to be doing, but so busy in your life that you don't have time to spend with the giver of life.
Yeah.
So
I think it's a huge one, Father. You gotta say my favorite punchline, one of my favorite from the book, from when I've heard you speak, but it is one of my, makes me laugh out loud. There's the question.
What do you say when parishioners tell you that you feel far? Yeah, I mean, I I say this, not in a dismissive way, but sometimes people will say to me, Father Nick, I just feel so far from God. And I always tell them, well, guess who moved? I mean, God doesn't move. He's there.
Love that.
Yeah. I mean, and we're, it's one of those things where I think, to kind of use the story of the prodigal son, when you go out on your own, you'll end up in a pig's pen.
Yeah.
When you do things on your own, when you do things away from God, when you're so preoccupied with trying to accomplish, like the prodigal son was, what he wanted, what his goals were, what God reveals is that you're going to end up in a pig pen. And I would argue that's what kind of like what we're seeing in the world today, that when we leave God, when we depart from him, when we make everything else little gods, instead of making him the true God over our life, we end up in a pig's pen. And so so I just encourage you, insert time every day. It's almost non-negotiable, friends, where you're sitting next to Christ.
Yeah. Boy, this next one is a good one. I mean, I love it. At first I was like, okay, stand firm. Isn't that similar to stand with God? But you added one piece of it, which I just love, which was the discernment part of it. I love that.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
go ahead, Father.
I mean, if you take the time to just read, going back to that book of Ephesians, when it says that we don't fight against powers and principalities. I mean, we don't fight against flesh and blood, but powers and principalities. Right after that, Bob, it says, it gives this whole statement about standing firm, standing firm. And obviously, when we talk about this standing firm, it's standing firm in what God yearns for us. And in order for us to kind of know that, we have to have, as St. John Climacus calls this, going back to this ladder of divine ascent, this book that was so mass produced early on that sadly many Christians today have no idea about, this ladder of divine ascent. He calls discernment the mother of all virtues. To be able to discern that, is what I'm doing in alignment with what Christ would want me to be doing? Does it measure up with what the church teaches us? Does it measure up with what Christ and the scriptures talk about? And if not, then that's not from Christ. It's from the enemy. And sometimes, I think we don't realize this, but sometimes when Christ was being tempted by the devil at one point uses scripture. Now, he obviously uses it and mistranslates it on a number of levels, but the enemy has no problem using things that we think are in the hemisphere of being quote unquote holy against us. The very first statement that the enemy says, that the devil says in the entire Bible, is he says, did God really say that? In other words, he was already sowing. The very first thing he says that's recorded is when he was already sowing seeds of doubt, like doubting the authenticity, the teachings of the church. And so when we talk about standing firm, it's like standing firm to say, hey, wait a minute, is what I'm doing, is the way I'm acting, is the way I'm living, is in alignment with what Christ teaches us. And what I tell people a lot too is, remember that whatever you feed thrives, and whatever you starve dies. So in other words, if I'm feeding a negative habit, if I'm giving fuel to it, it's going to grow. And if I'm starving it, it's going to die. So the question I would ask all of you is, what would God say that you need to be starving in your life? And what do you need to be feeding in your life? So that's why that's that discernment of knowing, okay, what do I need to be, when I study my life, what are the things I need to stop doing? And what are the things I need to start doing? What are the things I need to be feeding? And what do I need to be starving?
Father, when you talk about principalities, we fight against, what was it? Principalities and
Powers and principalities, yes.
just define. I don't know that people quite know what you're referring to, but I have a pretty good idea what you're referring to.
So throughout the scriptures and in the letters of the epistles by St. Paul and even in Peter, this is after the resurrection. Keep in mind that it warns us. It says, wake up, or be careful, or as we're talking about now, stand firm, because the enemy, in the book of in the epistle of St. Peter, says, stand firm, for the enemy is like a roaring lion waiting for its prey. Now, we know that, just looking at the National Geographic Channel, that a lion doesn't go up to a gazelle and say, hey, here I am. It's on the prowl. It's the lion is actually looks very similar to the hay or to the brush that it's in. It conceals itself. It's camouflage in that, So in many ways, what we're telling everyone is that we are fighting a spiritual battle in this world, and the church never ignored that. In fact, the church was recognizing that even after the resurrection of Christ, was warning us, hey, be careful. We're living in a time where the enemy has worked. Now, he has power, but he doesn't have authority. We give him that authority when we engage, when we allow him to live inside of our souls, when we allow ourselves to compromise on our values, you name it. I mean, the persistent sins that we talk about. So what I tell people is, the greatest lie that the devil has ever told us is that he doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Because we won't fight something that we don't think is actually there. And for many of us, we just don't think there's an enemy. And because we don't think there's an enemy, that we just don't fight it, which is music to his ears. But there is an enemy, and we are. And when in one part of the Bible, it says, "Be angry, but don't sin, so as to not give the enemy," and then it defines it, the devil, a foothold in your life.
Yeah.
And so the church recognized it. I think we in Christianity today tend to kind of, blame people, blame situations for what we're seeing in the world happening. And so I'm not saying that we should go through life saying that the devil made me do it. That's not the case. We have to own the fact that we give fuel to the enemy to be doing what he's doing. And we see it in the world right now happening, on a number of levels.
Father, I'm going to butcher the story. I wish I knew it better. But there was a saint. I think that's what it was, a saint. And he was either a person or a saint and they came to him and said, I want to show you what's happening around you. And he showed him all the powers and principalities, and he could look out and see. And he got so down when he saw it. And the saint or whoever was with him said, but look up, there's far more of us than there are of them.
Right, right, right,
And it
right.
showed me, when I read that, I thought, that's what you're talking about. There is a
Right,
constant, we just don't see it, but
right,
a constant
right.
war out there.
Right. And I don't want to mislead everyone to think that there's these two equal powers, God and the devil. I mean, God destroyed that. We recognize that. So God's not sitting there going, oh my gosh, I'm going to be, I'm in a battle every day. No, internally, there's a spiritual battle happening on the inside of us that we have to recognize. And like there's this old Native American proverb that talks about these two wolves, a black wolf and a white wolf. And this Native American grandfather is taking his grandson through the mountains, and it's very cold outside, and he sees these two wolves, a white wolf and a black wolf, going at each other. They're fighting, and at times the black wolf is on top of the white wolf, and then vice versa. And long story short, the young child says to his grandfather, says, "Granddad, what's happening here?" And the grandfather says, "Well, this is the way your soul is. On the inside, there is something pure that God yearns for us to live. That's this white wolf. And there's something that's evil. That's this black wolf that's on the inside of you. And they're fighting on the inside of you internally." And the grandson said, well, naturally says to him, well, granddad, who wins the battle? And the grandfather responds to him, whichever one you feed the most. And so the question is which wolf are we feeding on a daily basis? Because there is an internal battle that's waging on the inside of us that obviously whatever happens on the inside is impacting on the outside. We see the world that's happening right now. And I'm giving a sermon series this Sunday on the book of Daniel. It starts this Sunday. And we're talking about the way that we even see the world itself compromising on our identity, compromising on our values. And how did people like Daniel and the three youth of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, how did they deal with that? We hear that in the very first chapter of the book of Daniel. And so my point is getting back to this, is standing firm and knowing that I need to stand firm because through discernment is what I'm doing and is the way I'm living is in accordance with Christ. And if not, you have a spiritual battle that's on the inside of you that may be beating and may be winning. Maybe the black wolf that's winning.
This next thing you said was one of my favorite points. I thought it was so nuanced and so, you kind of said it and went on, but boy, do I agree with this. It was, before you do anything, God will give you a warning sign. Anything negative, God, you want to expound? I thought that is so, boy, if someone can take just that away from us today, boy, I thought that was spot on.
So like we talked about before, the closer we get to God, that vertical relationship always shapes the horizontal relationship. So as you find yourself getting closer to God, naturally, everything that you do will filter through him. So his eyes become your eyes. His ears become your ears. I mean, everything that you do is a match up with Christ. And so when we talk about this, is that as you get closer to God, the more you hear him because you're closer to him. Okay. And what ends up happening at a very basic level is that God gives us warning signs. We would argue that that's the Holy Spirit that's speaking on the inside of us, that before we do something negative, he'll warn us. Now, there's also another voice that's telling us, well, if you want to do it, do it. There's that carnal flesh voice that loves to have power. And the book of James talks about this, the wisdom of the world, or the wisdom from God. And so if you give a volume switch to the wisdom of the world, it'll speak loud. And whichever voice you listen to the most has the ultimate power and is guiding your life. So that's why we talked about this, that when you're closer to Christ every day, when you're climbing that step, that voice will be louder.
True.
And as such, it is your responsibility to say, okay, wait a minute. Like, don't let my flesh lead me. Let my Savior lead me. Because I know that at the end of the day, the pain will always outweigh the pleasure. That at the end of the day, it may feel good in that moment, but the consequences of that, and that's why we listen to the voice of God. I just love this message that Christ talks about of being the good shepherd. And he says, I love it when he says that my sheep will
Oh
know
my,
my voice. They won't follow another voice. So even if
yeah,
another shepherd comes, they won't follow that. Um, and if you've ever been to the Middle East, or in any area where you have shepherds, even just the little sounds that the shepherds make, they know what that sound is, and they won't follow it from another shepherd, but they'll follow it because they know the tonality, the tone of their shepherd. That's how they follow. Same thing was with us. When we stay close to him, we can hear him more.
whenever I've gone through that thought process that you just mentioned, one of the things that always reminds you of when our triplets were born. Um, Obviously, you're overjoyed. Believe me, we almost lost them during the process. So you're overjoyed, but you don't quote unquote know them per
Mm,
se. You're just getting to know them. You just meet them. By the time they were 2, 3 years old, if I walked by the room and the three of them were all in one room, I could tell by their breathing who's who.
mm,
I had spent so much time with them. I could
that's
tell
good.
by the way they chewed food, by the
Mm,
way they slept, because you were so close to them.
mm,
I think sometimes I'm talking to friends and they'll tell me something, and I in my head I'm going, "That's God talking to you," but
mhm,
because they're not of that mind, or the one that really just gets me is someone will be. It's Diane Sawyer. I saw in an interview once, and somebody said, God told me to write this book, and she just looked. She went, God told you, spoke to you, and I knew what this person was saying because
mm,
I had that happen on almost every movie I've made. There's a moment where God says, "This is it," and
mm.
follow that. But if you get out of that mind, and you kind of alluded to that, which was if you will miss those moments. And I always think, oh my God, that's like a flashing red light saying, don't. But if you're not in that world, you just proceed to the cliff. And so I thought that was so wonderful, Father.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that is. That's why I not to be dismissive, but this is not like we talk about. This is not Kool-Aid Christianity. I mean, Jesus says, "Take up your cross and follow me." So a cross was over 100 pounds. Jesus would carry that the length of 3 football fields. It was heavy. It was hard, and he carried it in a terrain where it was hilly. It wasn't smooth. So you know for this reason, what we're talking about is not easy. I mean, but Christ never promises that. But he does promise that when we're close to him, when we take the time to take the next step towards him, that there will be a level of peace that surpasses all understanding. I had someone tell me the other day, Father Nick, all I just want to be is I just want to experience happiness. I just want to be happy, Father Nick. That's what God wants for me, right? And I responded to them and I said this respectfully. I said, no, God doesn't want you to be happy. He wants you to be holy. Because when you start getting holy, then you can experience what true happiness is.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
true. All right, number 3, climb the next step.
So, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, every one of us, me included, has an area of our life that we need to climb the next step with. Okay. So, as you're hearing my voice today, maybe for that climbing that next step is that maybe you need to climb the next step towards your marriage. I show this all the time, but, you know, in almost every negative and every statistic that regarding marriage right now, every negative statistic, it's up. So there are more marriages that we're spending less time as couples right now. The average time to clean up food is only about 3 to 4 minutes because oftentimes we're eating by ourselves. This is the most it's ever been. The amount of vacation that we're taking as a couple are at all times lows. The amount of praying together at all time lows. Yeah, these are the statistics. So maybe for you that are hearing maybe today you need to climb the next step towards climbing or getting closer to your spouse. Like before you correct, you connect to them. Like before you do anything else, that you just say, hey, maybe I just need to connect more to them. One of the things I'm so aware of is with my wife Roxanne is that, and obviously when we do this marriage, presentation with you on your show, you'll hear a lot of this, and I hope to do that in the next several
Speak
weeks.
for that. I never heard back from her.
I know we have to talk to her about that. I don't know if that's more of a reflection of me or you, but we'll get to that at some other point. But what I what I tell people is like, you know, Corrie ten Boom said it this way, an amazing Christian woman who was a Holocaust survivor as well, but helped to free a lot of Jewish people that were under the German occupation. She said, "If the devil can't make you sin, he'll just make you busy."
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, like some of the things that sometimes it's not the big things that hurt us, it's the small things that are killing our marriages. It's just the lack of time together, the lack of genuine conversation. And I know in my relationship with Roxanne, one of the questions that I ask her every single month is I'll go to her, I'll say, Roxanne, tell me how I can love you better. And just genuinely asking those kind of questions. Or what is one thing that you would love me to do more of that I'm not doing right now?
Smart.
And it's it may be a silly question. Some of you that may have been married have been married for years and years go, Father Nick, that ship has already sailed. Well, yeah, but you control that. You control the ability to take that next step. Because at the end of the day, when we stand before Christ, we want to be able to say with full conviction that Lord, I did the best that I could do. I wasn't perfect. I'm definitely a sinner. I definitely made a lot of mistakes. But in this gift that you gave me of life, I took the next step in every area that I could, every area that I thought. So maybe the next step for you is not just in marriage, but maybe the next step is becoming more and more dependent upon God. Maybe you're single, and or you're divorced, and you're going, maybe the climb of the next step is depending more on God and less on the past. Maybe you were hurt, and we own that. You went through a difficult time and a hurtful time, but maybe God is telling us today, hey, look, I need you to take the next step. I'll deal with the hurt. I'll deal with that pain. Just turn the page. Climb the next step by just turning the page, because maybe he's telling you today that you can't, that if you keep living in the past, you're never going to have peace in the present. Or maybe for some of you, climbing the next step is not being by yourself. That when you're by yourself, you compromise on your morals and your values in ways that God never dreamed for you to do. So the important thing to know is that you know what you need to carry. Like, you can't conquer, friends, what you're not willing to confront. So you have to be able to know, what is that cross that I need to be taking the next step with, that God is yearning for me to do. I can't get to my resurrection if I don't go through if I don't first have a crucifixion, if I don't still identify the area that I need to hang on the cross. And every one of us has that, at least an area. For me, there's many areas, but what is that area that you say, God, I need to climb the next step on this with you?
You had you summed it up this way, Father, which I thought was great. If your New Year's resolution's the same year after year, you're not climbing. I thought, so well said. I mean, it's a visual that you go like, I get that. It's funny you say that about with Roxanne. This weekend, Trish and I, for years, just because we had 3 kids and life was crazy, I had to work 7 days a week, and sometimes I had to stay and work through the night at the office on certain times of the year. And it was just brutal, but what I had to do. But over the last couple of years, I think Trish would probably say last year, and that's probably more accurate. When I finished the last film, I thought, okay, I want that to change. I don't want to do that anymore, to be all consumed, so forth. And so this past weekend, she said, we went to church, came home, and she said, what do you want to do? And I honestly, I said, I just want to spend time with you. Whatever you want to do, I just want to spend time with you. And the thing was, I love about Trisha, she just went on to the next thing. I said, no, wait, did you hear what I said? But I want you to know that, and Trisha loves, if you give Trisha 2 minutes out of a day, she'll get in a car and go to the beach for a minute and then drive back. She just loves the beach. I'm not that, she's a beach crazy. I'm like a beach nice, But we went down to the beach and we were there for like an hour, whatever, came home, and I forget what else we did. We went shopping, and, and I sincerely meant it, because I do think that all those areas of our life, whether it's your children, the way you raise them, or your wife, to me, the way I thought about it, and going back to my wife for a second, I want to be the MVP of that. If they were giving out an MVP award for husband of the universe, whatever. Well, I want to compete for that because I love my wife that much. Same with my children. I want to be the MVP. I don't want to just be the MVP of making films because to me, that's a lopsided life. And there's so many people out there. If I went through with you and I said, tell me the top 10 actors or actresses you know, and then you would list them off, and then I would break down their lives, you would see lives that were so dominant in one area of their career that the other aspects of their life just fell apart. And some of them are my friends, and some of them I wanted so bad that they would have a family life, and it didn't happen. And so I think what you're saying is great, and I do think the New Year's resolution is perfect with the way you stated that. If you want to elaborate on that for a second.
Yeah, I mean, I just, one of the things that I do, and not again, I think as I share oftentimes on your program, is that I never want to ever come across as me being something different than all of the people that are tuning in. We're all on the same team. We're all on the same. We're all trying to grow in our walk of faith. But for me, what I found that works with me is having goals and literally goals in every facet of my life. And I call these the goal of fives. In fact, our book Renewing You has this, but that in 5 weeks, 5 months, and 5 years, where do I see myself? Basically, it's where am I climbing the next step in my spiritual life, in my relationship with my family, in my professional, as being a priest of a community. Where do I want to see this parish? Where do I want to help lead this parish? And I found that, and I keep that list as I shared before with you, Bob, right next to my nightstand. It's actually on my nightstand, so it's always every time I wake up in the morning, every time I go to bed, it's there. I visually see it all the time. And I just would ask, our listeners today is, what are your goal of fives in 5 weeks from now, 5 months from now, 5 years from now? What steps do you want to be climbing spiritually, relationally, and professionally? Those 3 areas. And I would make it a point to, once you start doing that, and write it down, put it visually in front of you, and allow yourself to kind of measure yourself based upon that. Because for a lot of people, we oftentimes, when people talk about Christianity, or when someone asks us about our Christian faith, this may be hard to hear, but sometimes we're sharing and we're nursing off of what we consumed as children in talking about our faith now. In other words, we're milking off of what we learned years and years ago, and as opposed to what we should be doing now. And so, for a lot of times, we have not, like, I tell people, if you're at the same place that you were spiritually as you were last year, then something's wrong. Then you haven't taken that next step. And so sometimes visually sharing that and revealing that, it challenges us to put it in paper, and it gives us if you will, a goal that we're constantly seeing. And it's something very simple: 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years. And when you set those goals, when you talk about climbing those steps, they need to be things that are actually attainable, things that are smart goals, if you will. That they're goals that we know that if I push myself, I can do it. Not things that, like, I want to read the entire Bible in the next, 5 weeks. I mean, the chances of you doing that based upon your past is probably limited. But if you said, I want to start doing it in a year, I may, or in 5 months, I may be able to get closer to that. I can set those goals for myself. Or maybe just spending time in prayer, like we talked about earlier, sitting next to Christ. Those are the kind of things that we need to kind of put in there. So I would encourage you guys that if you answer the question that you're at the same place that you were a year ago, or the same New Year's resolutions you keep having year after year, then I would say that the resolution is not the problem. It's the defining of, it's actually the putting into practice the goals that you're going to do in a very in a way that's attainable. So I would use the 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 year goals.
It's interesting. One of my sons they all played football in high school, and 2 played in college. One of them was a quarterback, and he had a lot of different trainers through the years. One of them was a guy named Tom House, and Tom House, towards the end of Tom Brady's career, Tom Brady would go to Tom House. And so when we were up there training, some of these training sessions would go for 3-4 hours. And I remember my son was, 17 at the time, and we would get in the car and he was just wiped at the end of it. And Jordan was a free and is a free spirit. And he would sit down. We would drive about an hour and a half to get there. An hour and a half. It was on a Saturday. And he would get in the car and he would say, wow, I just gave up my whole Saturday. And I would always say the same thing. If you don't want to come next week, we don't have to come. We don't have to do this. But he just said, he just put my headphones on and he would just do his thing after that. Right? I think there may have been a thank you, Dad, for wasting your weekend too, but I'm not sure. But my point was this: in getting to know Tom House, asking him, well, Brady had won, I think, 5 or 6 Super Bowls. What's he doing up here? I mean, what are you going to teach him? He said, Bob, we will do 3 or 4 hours with him, and he'll get maybe 15 minutes where we go, okay, we have to work on that because everything else is so up to a level. He said, and that's why he comes to us, because we will tell him at the end, this was all great. This isn't really good. And he said, that's why he came to us, because you're the only ones telling me this is what I need to improve on.
That's great.
And it gave me such an insight to how you get to, how you improve year after year. So, all right, you kind of touched on it, but if you can, I just want people to understand, because I thought it was such a great story, especially about the first book I guess the first or second, however you want to phrase it, that became mass produced. And I thought it was so fascinating. The man who made the decision, this is the one because of XYZ. If you want to finish that out.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the beautiful things that we in our life, when we start just kind of looking at history, sometimes we kind of just look back into the last maybe 100 years or whatever, and kind of base our history off of that. Or and sometimes we don't even like to even look back at history. But I love looking at history because obviously for a church like the Orthodox Church, is so much historically based. There's so much beauty in knowing the history of the Christian church, but also the history of how the Bible was mass produced. And I mentioned this earlier about the Gutenberg press. And basically, there was a very famous pioneer. I'm going to read a little bit of just some notes that I had taken. A very famous pioneer named Antonio Mendoza, who would challenge a printer to bring the printing press to the country, because he wanted to print a book that would help the world. Mendoza knew that the first books that would be produced had the power to transform the world. This is in the 1500s, by the way, everyone. Well, in 1530, they would print their very first book, and that very first book that was not a book on philosophy, not a book on psychology, but the very first book following the Gutenberg press is after being mass producing the Bible, was this book that Antonio Mendoza decided to have as the very first book mass produced, and that was the Ladder of Divine Ascent. Ladder of Divine Ascent by St. John Climacus. That was one of the most. It was the most mass-produced book at that time outside of the Bible, especially in the Western Hemisphere. And I love it because we've obviously been talking about that throughout the show today, about this importance of these steps that one can take. And I just encourage all of you that are listening, Google the Ladder of Divine Ascent, read about St. John Climacus. It's an extraordinary saint. Read about his teachings. But this book was so powerful that it transformed the Christian world. Unfortunately, now, because there's so many different Christian traditions and denominations, oftentimes their history only kind of dates back to the Protestant Reformation and kind of stops there. Or for that matter, their history may only go back to the time of Christ, and then where they are currently at the church. But when you start looking back at these things that were happening, these books that were mass produced that helped to shape the Christian world back in the day, it's beautiful to hear that the Ladder of Divine Ascent was one that challenges us to take additional steps every day in our walk of faith. And so definitely encourage our listeners to take.
I love that he made a choice that this is the book, because I want this to be the net result of it as well.
Exactly.
Okay. Last bonus question. It's one of my favorites. So it was one of the first time I spoke to you, and I was like, oh, God, I can relate to this guy. So, I mentioned my kids play football, and I was probably the only, and then, all three ended up doing track too. And I was probably the only person I've ever met. My son ran the 440 in one of the relays. I could lose his voice in his son running one lap. By the end of that lap, my voice was shot. So, I mean, I was just screaming,
Yeah.
oh my God. And same thing with football. But when I met you, you were telling me about your son playing soccer, George playing soccer. And I said, Father, I see some priests out there and they're so gracious. And, what feels my son on? I'm thinking, oh my gosh, they're so kind. Why can't I be like that? And then I said, what are you like? Tell me what you were like. And then tell me what your son, George, said. I think when you said, can you hear me yelling? I think so. Tell me that story. I love it.
So I always, I would love for all of our friends that tune into us to think that I'm a very quiet person on the soccer field, or for that matter, Roxanne is a quiet person on the soccer field. But that couldn't be farther from the truth. We are loud and proud. I mean, we are the parents that the coach always is complaining about, that is talking from the sidelines, that should not be talking. So typically Roxanne and I will stay apart from each other, but in this particular situation, we were right next to each other, and this was probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and George was on the soccer field, and I don't know why we're one of these parents that think that we know better than the coach does. Faulty thinking, obviously. But we saw George playing, and we were telling him, hey, in the middle of the game, we were saying, hey, George, pass the ball here, kick it, pass it over there, kick it over here, use this leg, use that leg, hit it into the goal. And at one point, it looked as if he had done everything that we had told him to be doing. And so we were like, so he scored the goal, and we were all jumping up and down. We were high-fiving. Roxanne and I were high-fiving each other, and so excited. So he gets off the field, and we're all proud again. We're like, George, great job. You did an amazing job at the game today. And George, we said to him, George, we're so proud of you that you took our advice, that you did the things that we were asking you to do, that you went here, you passed it over there, you used this leg, you used that leg, and then you scored the goal. And he looked at us as if like in total shock. He's like, Baba, it's like, Dad, I didn't hear anything that you were saying. There was so much noise coming from that sideline that all I heard was just noise. I didn't hear what you were saying. And I use that obviously as a comparison to think about how much noise that we have in our own life, and so how sometimes we can't hear what God is trying to tell us because there's so much noise on the sidelines of our life going on, whether it be busyness, whether it be just kind of going through this world, whether it be our negative, faulty thinking, whether it be our own sinfulness, our struggles, whatever it is. And so God, as you've heard me say this many times, Bob, is God wants to communicate with us. He yearns to be in a relationship with us. But we can't be in a relationship with someone that we're not talking to, or for that matter, that we can't hear. Yeah. And so that's why, talking earlier about sitting next to God is finding that time to truly find that stillness to where we can hear what God is trying to tell us, because he wants to be he wants to be in every facet of our life, if we'll just simply allow him to do that.
Great. I love hearing that story. I can never get enough of that story. It makes me feel human. All right, Father, tell them, if I got this right, essentially the Lowe's.
Yes, yeah. I mean, this is thanks, Bob, as always, for the invitation to be with you.
It makes my day, my week. I love it.
It's we always enjoy each other's company, and we hope that all of you as well do. We're just trying to be very real with you. That's at the end of the day but also giving you some encouragement in your walk of faith. But everything that we do as that we as a family do to try to make a difference in the world can be found on our website at thelowes.com. And we send out a daily inspirational message. So again, if you're Orthodox Christian, but you're just looking for some daily inspiration in your own walk of faith, we encourage you just to go to our website, thelowes.com, and then /subscribe, or just click the subscribe button that's on the website. And just put your email address, and every day at 7 a.m. Eastern time, we'll send you our daily word of encouragement for that day. And then the book, Renewing You, you can find it on Amazon. It's on Borders, Barnes & Noble. It's at Ancient Faith, which is our publisher. You can go to store.ancientfaith.com /renewing you. But you can also get it on Amazon or on our website. It's all available there. And if you're interested in listening to our sermons, of which Bob hears every one of them,
love them.
Thank you. Thank
I
you, brother.
use them. I listen to them. They're so good.
Thank you, brother. Just go to the Lowe's YouTube channel. Just go to youtube.com and just put in the Lowe's, the Louhs, and it'll come up for you.
And also too, Father and Presbyterian Roxanne, they do speaking engagements. They're coming out here in a couple of months, and so they can get a hold of you there as well, Father.
Yes, on our website. Actually, we're going to be in Sacramento in a couple of weeks, and then we're going to be in Canton, Ohio. We were just in New Jersey, and just in then this past weekend I was out in right outside of Pittsburgh in Steubenville, Ohio. Yeah, I mean, we travel on our days off to kind of like just inspire people and give people some encouragement in their walk of faith. So you can find out again on our website.
Fantastic. I love it. Okay, so I think we redeemed ourselves, Father. Or at least
Yes,
me.
I hope so. I hope so.
The sound was bad. Everyone, thank you guys so much. I'm sorry again for the late start. It's just these microphones, sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. So I never know what's happening. But anyway, Father, I love it. And I'm so grateful you take the time out to speak to everybody. And we'll
It's totally
hopefully
my
be back
pleasure.
next week.
Thank
All right,
you,
brother.
Thank you. Take care,
God
everyone.
bless. Bye,
God bless.
everybody.